The blood on her feet left crimson droplets against the pristine white snow, each step a testament to her desperate flight through the blizzard that had descended upon the Sierra Nevada foothills without warning. Jackson Yates pulled his horse to an abrupt halt when he spotted the figure stumbling through the drifts ahead, barely more than a shadow against the swirling white curtain of the storm, and his heart seized with recognition that whoever it was wouldn't survive another hour in this merciless cold. He spurred his mare forward, closing the distance between them in seconds, and when he reached the woman, she collapsed into his arms as though her body had simply been waiting for permission to give up. Her lips were blue, her dark hair plastered against her pale face with melting snow, and when his eyes traveled downward, he saw her bare feet were torn and bleeding, the skin nearly white with frostbite. "Madam, can you hear me?" Jackson asked, but her eyes rolled back and her body went limp against his chest. Without hesitation, he sat down in the snow and began unlacing his leather boots, his fingers clumsy in the bitter cold. The December wind howled around them like a living thing, and he knew they had maybe 20 minutes before the storm claimed them both. He pulled off his boots and his thick wool socks, then as gently as possible, he wrapped her frozen feet in the socks first, then worked his boots onto her feet. They were far too large, but they would protect her from the snow and hold in whatever warmth he could give her. Jackson lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. His own feet immediately began to ache from the cold as he carried her to his horse, but he pushed the discomfort aside. He managed to mount with her cradled against him, settling her in front of his body so he could shield her from the worst of the wind. The horse needed little encouragement to turn toward home, sensing the danger in the air as clearly as Jackson did. The ride back to his ranch took 40 minutes that felt like an eternity. By the time the barn came into view through the sheets of snow, Jackson could no longer feel his feet, and the woman in his arms had begun to shiver violently, which he took as a good sign. Shivering meant her body was still fighting. He rode directly to the house rather than stopping at the barn, knowing his ranch hand Miguel would hear the commotion and come tend to the horse. Jackson kicked open the front door of his modest ranch house and carried his burden straight to the fireplace. He laid her on the thick bearskin rug in front of the hearth, then immediately set about building up the fire. His hands shook as he stacked logs and kindling. Whether from cold or the adrenaline coursing through his system, he couldn't say. When the flames were roaring, he turned his attention back to the woman. Her clothes were soaked through, a thin cotton dress that looked like it might have been part of a nightgown, covered by a wool coat that was far too inadequate for the weather. He knew he needed to get her out of the wet clothes, but he also knew he needed to respect her dignity. Jackson grabbed several thick blankets from his bedroom and returned to find her eyes had opened slightly, unfocused and confused. "You're safe," he said softly. "You're at the Yates Ranch, about 5 miles north of San Jose, California. My name is Jackson. I need to get you out of those wet clothes before hypothermia sets in worse than it already has. Can you understand me?" She nodded slightly, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them clicking together. "CC cold," she managed to whisper. "I know. We're going to fix that. Can you tell me your name?" Lily B. Baker." "All right, Lily. I'm going to turn around and I need you to try to get out of those wet clothes. Wrap yourself in these blankets. Can you do that?" She nodded again, and Jackson turned his back, staring at the wall while he listened to her struggle with the fabric. After several minutes, he heard a soft thump and spun around to find she had collapsed again, only partially out of her dress. He took a deep breath, said a quick prayer for propriety, and finished the job himself, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while he worked the soaked fabric off her body and wrapped her tightly in the dry blankets. He left his boots on her feet, knowing they needed to warm slowly. Jackson carried her to his leather armchair closest to the fire and sat down with her in his lap, wrapping his arms around the blanket cocoon and holding her close. His own body heat combined with the fire would be the fastest way to bring her temperature back up. She was still shivering violently, and he began to rub her arms and back through the blankets, trying to stimulate circulation. "What were you doing out there?" he asked, as much to keep her conscious as from curiosity. "There's nothing but wilderness for miles in that direction." Lily's eyes opened more fully now, and he got his first real look at them. They were a striking green like spring grass after rain, and they held a depth of pain that went beyond physical suffering. "Running," she whispered. "I was running." Jackson felt his jaw tighten. He had seen enough in his 32 years to know that when a woman ran barefoot into a blizzard, she was running from something terrible. "You're safe now," he repeated. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." Tears began to slide down her cheeks, cutting warm tracks through the cold that still clung to her skin. "He'll find me. Thomas always finds me." "Is Thomas your husband?" "No, he wanted to be. I said no." Her voice was getting stronger as warmth began to seep back into her body. "He didn't accept that answer. He took me from my home 3 days ago, kept me locked in a cabin up in the mountains, said he'd make me his wife whether I agreed or not. I managed to get away while he was sleeping, but I didn't have time to grab shoes or proper clothes. I just ran." Anger, hot and fierce, flooded through Jackson's chest. He had little patience for men who forced their will on women, having been raised by a mother who had instilled in him a deep respect for the fairer sex. "You did the right thing, running, and I promise you he won't take you back." "Not while I'm breathing." Lily looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time, and something shifted in her expression. Jackson was aware, suddenly, of how close they were, how intimate this situation had become out of necessity. He had a strong, weathered face that showed his years working under the California sun, dark hair that needed a cut, and brown eyes that his mother had always said were too soft for a rancher. He kept himself clean-shaven, unlike many of the men in these parts, and he knew he was considered reasonably handsome, though he had never put much stock in such things. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Jackson said simply. "And because no one deserves to freeze to death in a snowstorm, especially not while running from a man who can't understand the word no." The shivering was beginning to subside, which Jackson took as a good sign. He carefully examined what he could see of her feet, still encased in his boots. "I'm going to need to look at your feet properly once you're warmed up a bit more. You might have frostbite, and if we don't treat it right, you could lose toes." Lily nodded, then surprised him by burrowing closer against his chest. "You smell like leather and coffee," she murmured, her exhaustion evident in every word. "It's nice." Jackson felt his heart do something strange in his chest, a little flip that he wasn't quite prepared for. "You should rest," he said gently. "I'll keep the fire going and keep watch." "You're safe here, Lily. I promise." She was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out as her body finally surrendered to the warmth and safety. Jackson held her throughout the afternoon, occasionally adding logs to the fire, watching the storm rage outside his windows. He thought about what she had told him, about this man Thomas who had kidnapped her, and he felt his resolve harden. If the man came looking for her here, he would regret it. As the hours passed, Jackson found himself studying the woman in his arms. She was beautiful, he realized, though that wasn't why he had helped her. Even in sleep, even with the evidence of her ordeal written across her face, There was a strength to her features that spoke of resilience. Her dark hair was beginning to dry, revealing auburn highlights that caught the firelight. She looked to be in her mid-20s, old enough to have lived some life, but young enough that the world hadn't yet worn her down completely, despite what she had recently endured. The storm finally began to break as darkness fell, and Miguel knocked softly on the door before letting himself in. The older Mexican man had worked for Jackson's family for 20 years and was more friend than employee. His eyes widened when he saw Jackson sitting with a woman in his arms. "Dios mío," Miguel breathed. "Where did she come from?" "Found her in the snow up by the North Ridge," Jackson explained quietly, not wanting to wake Lily. "Barefoot and half frozen. She was running from a man who kidnapped her." Miguel's expression darkened. "She needs a doctor." "Probably, but we can't get to town until the snow clears, and I'm not sure I want to take her there anyway. If this man Thomas is looking for her, San Jose would be the first place he'd check." Jackson shifted slightly, feeling the stiffness in his own legs from sitting so long. "Can you bring me some warm water and clean cloths? I need to check her feet for frostbite." Miguel nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a basin of warm water and several clean towels. He set them beside the chair and gave Jackson a long, measuring look. "You have a good heart, Hijo, like your mama, but be careful. A man who steals women is a dangerous man." "I know," Jackson said. "Keep the rifle loaded and near the door." After Miguel left, Jackson gently roused Lily. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to memory, then to a flash of fear before she recognized where she was. "You're still here," she said, and there was wonder in her voice as though she had expected to wake up and find it had all been a dream. "I'm here," Jackson confirmed. "I need to look at your feet now. It might hurt, but I have to see how bad the damage is." He helped her shift so she was sitting sideways across his lap, then carefully removed his boots from her feet. The sight made him wince. Her feet were torn and bruised, the skin pale white in places with the telltale signs of frostbite. He dipped a cloth in the warm water and began to gently clean the wounds, and Lily bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, refusing to cry out even though he knew it must hurt terribly. "You're tougher than you look," Jackson observed, his respect for her growing. "I've had to be," Lily replied, her voice tight with pain. "My parents died when I was 16. Cholera outbreak in Sacramento. I've been on my own since then, working where I could find work. I was a seamstress in San Jose until a month ago when Thomas started coming around. He seemed nice at first, brought me flowers, was always polite. But when I told him I wasn't interested in courtship, he changed, got angry, started following me. I lost my job because of him, because my employer didn't want the trouble. I had to move 3 times trying to get away from him, and then he just took me." Jackson listened as he worked, carefully bandaging her feet after determining that while the frostbite was serious, she would likely keep all her toes if they were careful. "What does he look like, this Thomas?" "Tall, maybe 6 feet. Blonde hair, blue eyes. He has a scar across his left eyebrow from a knife fight, or so he told me. He works as a foreman at one of the lumber mills outside town. Thomas Garrett is his full name." Jackson committed the name and description to memory. "I know the lumber operations. I'll make some inquiries quietly, see what I can learn about him." "You're doing too much," Lily said softly. "You saved my life and now you're offering to help me more." "Why?" Jackson finished wrapping her feet and looked up at her, meeting those green eyes steadily. "Because I was raised to believe that when you see something wrong, you stand up and do something about it. And because you seem like someone worth helping." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Finally, Lily broke eye contact and looked down at her bandaged feet. I don't have anywhere to go. No money, no clothes, no job. I can't impose on you. You're not imposing. You'll stay here until you're healed, until we figure out how to make sure Thomas leaves you alone permanently. I have a spare bedroom. Miguel's wife, Clara, can come up from their cottage tomorrow and help you with anything you need. We'll figure it out, Lily. One step at a time. Lily's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than fear. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed, Jackson said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. He had been alone for a long time, had convinced himself he preferred it that way after his fiancée had left him 5 years ago to marry a banker in San Francisco. But having Lily here, having someone to protect and care for, had awakened something in him that had been dormant for too long. Over the next week, as the snow slowly melted and Lily recovered her strength, Jackson found himself looking forward to every interaction with her. Clara had indeed come to help, bringing clothes that had belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to San Diego. Lily proved to be exactly as tough as Jackson had suspected, insisting on helping around the house even as her feet healed, learning to navigate in thick socks until the wounds closed enough for proper shoes. They fell into an easy routine. Jackson would rise before dawn to handle the ranch work, tending to the cattle and horses with Miguel's help, making repairs to fences and equipment, all the 1,000 tasks that running a ranch required. He would return to the house around midday to find Lily had prepared lunch, and they would sit together at his small kitchen table and talk. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a milliner, how she had learned to sew from her mother and to read from her father. He told her about growing up on this ranch, the son of pioneers who had come west during the gold rush and stayed to build something lasting. My father died when I was 25, Jackson said one afternoon, watching Lily mend one of his shirts with quick, expert stitches. Heart gave out while he was working. My mother followed him 2 years later. I think she just didn't want to live without him. They had that kind of love, you know. The kind that doesn't make sense to anyone on the outside, but it's so real and so deep that losing it is like losing half your soul. Lily looked up from her sewing, her expression thoughtful. That must have been hard, losing them both so close together. It was, still is sometimes. This house gets pretty quiet in the winter. Jackson realized what he had said and felt heat rise in his face. Not that I'm complaining about the company now. I mean, that's not why I brought you here. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her, bright and genuine and absolutely devastating. I know why you brought me here, Jackson. You're a good man. I think maybe the best man I've ever met. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Jackson found himself wanting to close the distance between them, to pull her into his arms and kiss her until neither of them could breathe. But he held back, knowing it was too soon, knowing she needed time to heal from more than just physical wounds. That night, Jackson lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the woman sleeping in the room down the hall. He had been attracted to women before, had loved his former fiancée Sarah, or at least thought he had. But what he felt growing inside him for Lily was different. It was deeper, rooted in something more substantial than mere physical attraction or social compatibility. He admired her strength, her resilience, the way she refused to let what Thomas had done to her break her spirit. He loved the sound of her laugh, which he had finally heard when Miguel's old dog had stolen a biscuit off the counter. He loved the way she moved through his house, bringing life and warmth to rooms that had felt cold and empty for too long. But he also knew that Lily was vulnerable right now, that she might be confusing gratitude with deeper feelings, and the last thing he wanted was to take advantage of that. So he resolved to be patient, to be her friend and protector, and to let whatever might develop between them unfold in its own time. 2 weeks after he found her, Lily was well enough to walk around the ranch, and Jackson took her on a tour of the property. The snow had melted away except for patches in the deepest shadows, and the winter sun was bright and warm. He showed her the barn where he kept his horses, introduced her to each animal by name, watched as she fearlessly approached his biggest stallion, and laughed when the horse nuzzled her hand looking for treats. "You're good with animals," he observed. "We had a cat when I was little," Lily said, stroking the stallion's nose. "My mother said I used to fall asleep in the barn with my arms around him. I've always felt comfortable around animals. They're honest in a way people sometimes aren't." They walked together along the creek that ran through his property, the water running high with snowmelt, and Jackson pointed out where he planned to expand his herd come spring. "My father always dreamed of making this one of the biggest cattle operations in California. I've been working toward that, but it's slow going when you're doing it alone." "You have Miguel," Lily pointed out. "I do, and he's worth 3 men, but I mean alone in the bigger sense. No wife, no children, no family to build it for." Jackson picked up a flat stone and skipped it across a calm section of the creek. "Sarah, my ex-fiancée, she said she couldn't see herself stuck on a ranch in the middle of nowhere for the rest of her life. She wanted the city, parties, society. I couldn't blame her for wanting those things, but I couldn't give up this place either. It's in my blood." Lily was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow past. "I grew up in a city, but I don't miss it the way I thought I would. It's peaceful here, beautiful. I can see why you love it." Jackson turned to look at her, the sunlight catching in her hair, her face tilted up to catch the warmth, and his heart clenched with want. "Lily, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, those green eyes direct and clear. "What is it?" "I've been asking around carefully about Thomas Garrett. He's been telling people in San Jose that his fiancée ran away during the storm, that he's desperate to find you and make sure you're all right. He's got half the town believing you're lost in the wilderness somewhere, maybe dead. He's playing the part of the grieving almost husband." Lily's face went pale. "He's looking for me." "Yes, but no one knows you're here. I made sure of that. Miguel and Clara won't say anything, and we're far enough from town that there's no reason for anyone to come out here." Jackson took her hand, the first time he had deliberately touched her beyond necessity since that first day. "But I think we need to be smart about this. If you want to go back to town, to tell people what really happened, I'll back you up. I'll stand with you and make sure everyone knows the truth." "And what if they don't believe me?" Lily asked, her voice small. "He's a foreman, respected, known in the community. I'm nobody, a woman alone with no family, no reputation to stand on. Who do you think they'll believe?" Jackson squeezed her hand. "They'll believe you because I'll make them believe you. The Yates name still means something around here. My family has been part of this community for 30 years. People trust me." "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," Lily said. "You've already done so much." "You're not bringing trouble, he is. And I meant what I said that first day. He's not taking you back. Not now, not ever." Jackson paused, weighing his next words carefully. "But there's another option if you want it. You could stay here, not as a guest, but as part of the ranch. Clara needs help with the cooking and cleaning, now that she's getting older. I could use someone to handle the household accounts, the correspondence with buyers. It would be legitimate work, a legitimate reason for you to be here." "You want to hire me?" Lily asked, and he couldn't quite read her expression. "I want you to be safe," Jackson said honestly. "If that means hiring you, then yes. If it means standing up in front of the whole town and calling Thomas Garrett the kidnapping coward he is, I'll do that too. Whatever you need, Lily." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, and he saw the exact moment she made her decision. "I'll stay, if you're sure it won't be an imposition." "It won't be," Jackson said, and he knew he was smiling like a fool, but he couldn't help it. "It absolutely won't be." That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner that Clara helped prepare. And afterward, Jackson taught Lily to play chess by the fire. She picked up the game quickly, beating him by their third match, and he found himself captivated by the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the way her eyes lit up when she saw a strategy he had missed. "You let me win," she accused after her victory. "I did not," Jackson protested, laughing. "You're just naturally good at this. You think 3 moves ahead." "My father taught me," Lily said, her expression turning wistful. "We used to play every Sunday after church. He said chess taught you to anticipate consequences, to think before you acted." "I miss him. I miss both of them." Jackson reached across the chessboard and took her hand again, the gesture becoming more natural each time. "They'd be proud of you, the way you survived, the way you kept fighting." "I hope so," Lily whispered. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I should be stronger, braver." "You ran barefoot through a blizzard to escape a man who wanted to force you into marriage. You survived hypothermia and frostbite. You're healing and moving forward instead of letting fear paralyze you." "Lily, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." The look she gave him then was so full of emotion that Jackson felt his breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward across the chessboard. Lily met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was soft and sweet and perfect. The kiss lasted only a moment before they both pulled back, but Jackson felt it all the way to his toes. "I've wanted to do that for days," he admitted. "So have I," Lily said, her cheeks flushed. "But Jackson, I need you to understand something. I'm not confused about what I'm feeling. I know some of it started as gratitude, but it's grown into something more. You're kind and strong and honorable, and when I look at you, I see the kind of future I thought I'd never have. But I also know I need time. What Thomas did, the fear and the helplessness, I need to work through that before I can give you everything you deserve." "I'll wait," Jackson said simply. "However long you need, Lily, I'll wait." The weeks turned into a month and then 2. Lily settled into life on the ranch with a natural ease that made it feel like she had always been there. She took over the household management, revealing a keen head for numbers and organization that impressed Jackson. She helped Clara with the cooking and cleaning, learned to garden from Miguel, and even began helping Jackson with some of the ranch correspondence, her neat handwriting and way with words making his business letters far more professional than his own rough attempts. But it was the small moments that Jackson treasured most. The way Lily would bring him coffee while he worked on the accounts in the evening, sitting beside him and reading while he calculated figures. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes and told him stories about her childhood that made him wish he could have known her parents. The way she had started touching him casually, a hand on his shoulder as she passed, her fingers brushing his when she handed him things, building a physical comfort between them that felt natural and right. They kissed again several times, each one deeper and more passionate than the last, but Jackson held himself back from pushing for more. He could feel Lily healing, could see the shadows leaving her eyes day by day, and he was determined to let her set the pace. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the hills, and Jackson took Lily riding for the first time, lending her one of his gentler mares. She proved to be a competent rider, and they spent the afternoon exploring the far reaches of his property, stopping to picnic beside a grove of oak trees that his mother had loved. "This place is paradise," Lily said, lying back on the blanket and looking up at the sky through the tree branches. I never knew I wanted a life like this until I had it." Jackson propped himself up on his elbow beside her, looking down at her face. "What did you think you wanted? Honestly, just survival, just getting through each day without disaster. I never let myself dream bigger than that, not after my parents died. It seemed safer not to hope for too much." She turned her head to look at him. "But you've made me want to hope again, Jackson. You've made me want things I was afraid to want." "What kinds of things?" he asked, his voice low. "A home, a family, love." She reached up and traced her fingers along his jaw. "You." Jackson closed the distance between them, kissing her with all the pent-up longing of the past 2 months. Lily responded with equal fervor, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. They kissed until they were both breathless, until Jackson's control was hanging by a thread, and then he forced himself to pull back. "I want you too," he said roughly. "More than I've ever wanted anything. But I need you to be sure, Lily. I need you to be completely sure." "I am sure," she said, her eyes bright and clear. "I love you, Jackson Yates. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you gave me your boots and carried me to safety. But I know I love you now completely and fully. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you treat everyone with respect, from Miguel to the youngest calf. I love the way you look at me like I'm precious. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you smell like leather and sunshine. I love you." Jackson felt something inside his chest expand and crack open, something that had been locked away since Sarah left, maybe even longer. "I love you too. I think I knew it the moment I saw you in the snow, and I've been falling deeper every day since. You've brought light into my life, Lily. You've made this house feel like a home again." "Then make it official," Lily said, her voice steady and sure. "Marry me, Jackson. Let me stay here not as an employee or a guest, but as your wife." Jackson laughed, joy flooding through him like sunlight. "That's supposed to be my line." "I don't care about supposed to," Lily said, smiling up at him. "I care about what is. And what is that I love you and I want to spend my life with you. So yes or no, cowboy?" "Yes," Jackson said, kissing her again. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in San Jose, with Miguel and Clara standing up with them and half the town in attendance. Jackson had made sure word got around about the wedding, had made sure Thomas Garrett heard about it too. He wanted there to be no doubt, no room for the man to make claims on Lily. She was his now, legally and completely, and there wasn't a damn thing Thomas could do about it. The man himself showed up at the church, standing in the back with murder in his blue eyes, but Jackson had anticipated that. He had also made sure Sheriff Martinez knew the whole story, had filed an official complaint about the kidnapping. When Thomas tried to approach Lily after the ceremony, the sheriff intercepted him with a friendly hand on his shoulder and a not-so-friendly warning in his ear. Jackson watched as Thomas's face went red with rage, but the man was smart enough not to make a scene. He left the church, and Jackson made a mental note to stay vigilant. Men like Thomas didn't give up easily, but that day was for celebration, not worry. They held a small reception at the ranch, with food and music and dancing under the spring stars. Jackson held his new wife in his arms and swayed to the guitar music Miguel was playing, and he felt more complete than he had in years. "Happy?" he asked, looking down at Lily's glowing face. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied. "Thank you for finding me, Jackson. Thank you for saving me." "You saved me too," he said honestly. "I was just going through the motions before you came. You reminded me what it means to really live." That night, after all the guests had gone home, Jackson carried Lily over the threshold of their house, just like his father had carried his mother all those years ago. He took her to their bedroom, the room that had been his alone for so long, and loved her with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and complete. In the morning, Jackson woke to find Lily already awake, propped up on her elbow watching him with a soft smile. "What?" he asked, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm just thinking about how different my life is from what it was 6 months ago. How much better. How loved I feel." "Good," Jackson said, pulling her down for a kiss. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you feel exactly that way." The months that followed were the happiest of Jackson's life. He and Lily worked together to expand the ranch, building new corrals and negotiating contracts with buyers in San Francisco. Lily's business acumen proved invaluable, and by the end of summer, they had increased their profits by nearly 30%. But more than the financial success, Jackson treasured the partnership they had built, the way they worked together as a true team. There was one dark spot on their happiness. Thomas Garrett continued to make trouble where he could, spreading rumors about Lily in town, suggesting she had seduced Jackson for his money, implying she was no better than a prostitute. Jackson confronted him once in the street, and it took Miguel and 2 other men to pull them apart before real violence erupted. Sheriff Martinez warned them both to keep the peace, but Jackson could see in Thomas's eyes that the man wasn't finished. The confrontation came in early autumn, when the leaves were turning gold and red across the hills. Jackson was working in the north pasture when he heard a scream from the direction of the house. His blood turned to ice and he ran, covering the distance faster than he ever had before, his heart pounding with terror at what he might find. Thomas was in the kitchen, his hand locked around Lily's wrist, trying to drag her toward the door. Her face was white with fear but also blazing with fury, and she was fighting him with everything she had. Jackson didn't even think, just acted, tackling Thomas away from his wife and sending both men crashing into the kitchen table. They fought like animals, trading punches and grappling on the floor. Thomas was strong from his work at the lumber mill, but Jackson had rage and desperation on his side. He thought of Lily's bare feet in the snow, of the bruises Thomas's grip was leaving on her wrist, of all the fear this man had caused, and he channeled it all into his fists. By the time Miguel arrived with a rifle, Jackson had Thomas pinned to the floor, his hand drawn back for another punch. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't kill you right now," Jackson growled. "Because I'm not worth hanging for," Thomas spat, blood running from his split lip. "She's not worth it either. Stupid girl doesn't know what she gave up." Jackson hit him one more time, felt the satisfaction of the man's head snapping back, then forced himself to stand. "Miguel, ride to town and get the sheriff. Tell him Thomas Garrett broke into my home and assaulted my wife. Tell him to bring handcuffs." Thomas was arrested and charged with trespassing, attempted kidnapping, and assault. The trial was held 2 weeks later, and this time Lily stood up in front of the whole courtroom and told her story. She described the initial kidnapping, the 3 days locked in the cabin, her desperate flight through the snow. Other women came forward too, women Thomas had harassed over the years, and the picture they painted was damning. Thomas Garrett was sentenced to 5 years in San Jose prison, and when he was led away in chains, Jackson saw the tension finally leave Lily's shoulders. She turned to him with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief, of release. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "It's over," Jackson confirmed, holding her close. "He can't hurt you anymore." That night they lay in bed together, Lily curled against Jackson's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. "I was so scared," she admitted. "When I saw him in the kitchen, for just a moment I was back in that cabin, helpless and trapped. But then I remembered I'm not that person anymore. I'm stronger now. I have you and this place and a life worth fighting for. You were always strong, Jackson said. You just needed someone to remind you of it. The year turned and winter came again, but this time Jackson wasn't alone in his house watching the snow fall. Lily was beside him, her hands resting on the slight swell of her belly where their first child grew. They had discovered her pregnancy in November, and Jackson had felt a joy so profound he thought his heart might burst. He was going to be a father. They were going to be a family. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, looking up from the baby blanket she was knitting. "About how much can change in a year," Jackson said. "Last winter I was alone, just going through the motions. This winter I have you and soon we'll have a baby. It doesn't seem real sometimes." "It's real," Lily said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. As if on cue, the baby kicked, a strong thump against his palm that made Jackson's eyes go wide with wonder. "Very real." "I'm going to be a father," he said, still marveling at the idea. "You're going to be a wonderful father," Lily corrected. "Patient and kind and strong. Everything a child could want." Their son was born on a bright March morning, after a labor that lasted through the night and left both Jackson and Lily exhausted. But when the midwife placed the squalling infant in Jackson's arms, he felt something shift in his soul, a fierce protectiveness, and love so intense it almost hurt. The baby had Lily's green eyes and Jackson's dark hair, and he was perfect. "What should we name him?" Lily asked from the bed, her face pale but glowing with happiness. Jackson looked down at his son, then over at his wife, the woman who had stumbled into his life barefoot and frozen and changed everything. "How about James, after your father?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered." "I remember everything you've ever told me," Jackson said, carrying the baby over to the bed and carefully placing him in Lily's arms. "James Baker Yates. What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," Lily whispered, looking down at their son with an expression of such pure love that Jackson had to blink back his own tears. "He's perfect. We're perfect." And they were. The years that followed brought their share of challenges, the normal struggles of running a ranch and raising a family. Money was sometimes tight, winters sometimes harsh, cattle sometimes sick. But through it all, Jackson and Lily faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. 2 years after James was born, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Grace, named for Jackson's mother. 3 years after that came another son, Daniel. The house that had once felt so empty was now full of noise and laughter, of children running through the halls and toys scattered across the floors. And Jackson loved every chaotic moment of it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Lily back to the place where he had found her, up on the north ridge where the snow had been falling that fateful December day. It was summer now, the hills green and dotted with wildflowers, the sky a brilliant blue above them. "Why did you bring me here?" Lily asked, though she was smiling. "Because this is where my life really began," Jackson said. "The day I found you in the snow, that was the day everything changed. I wanted to come back here and remember, to thank whatever force in the universe put you in my path." Lily wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "I used to think that day was the worst of my life. Running from Thomas, freezing in the snow, so scared and alone. But it was actually the best day because it led me to you. I gave you my boots and carried you to warmth," Jackson said, echoing the thought that had run through his mind so many times over the years. "And I gave you my heart," Lily finished, looking up at him. "Fair trade, I'd say." Jackson kissed her there on the ridge, with the wind blowing through the grass and the sun warm on their faces, and he thought about all the years stretching ahead of them. More children, maybe, when Lily's body was ready. watching their sons and daughter grow up, teaching them to love this land the way he did. Growing old together, weathering whatever storms life brought their way. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here instead of going back to the city?" "Never," Lily said firmly. "This is home." "Your home. I've never belonged anywhere the way I belong here with you." They raised their children on the ranch, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. James grew up to be steady and reliable like his father, taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Jackson's hair turned gray. Sarah Grace had her mother's head for business and her father's stubborn determination, and she became one of the first women in California to earn a degree in agricultural studies. Daniel was the dreamer of the family, preferring books to cattle, and they supported him when he decided to become a teacher like his grandfather. The ranch prospered under Jackson and Lily's stewardship, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in Central California. But the financial success was never what mattered most to Jackson. What mattered were the nights sitting on the porch with Lily, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and red, her hand in his and their life spread out around them in every direction. When Jackson was 62 years old, with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes from years of smiling, he and Lily celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, inviting what seemed like half of San Jose, and as Jackson looked around at all the people they had touched over the years, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Speech. Someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant until Jackson had no choice but to stand. He pulled Lily up beside him, keeping her hand clasped firmly in his. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, and the crowd laughed because everyone knew that was true. "But I want to say something about this woman here. 32 years ago, I found Lily running barefoot through a snowstorm, and I gave her my boots and carried her to warmth. Best decision I ever made. She's been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life, and the mother of my children. She's made me a better man than I ever would have been without her. So here's to Lily, to love that lasts, and to the random chances that change our lives forever." The crowd cheered and raised their glasses, but Jackson only had eyes for Lily, who was looking up at him with that same expression of love he had seen on their wedding day, unchanged by the passage of time. "I love you," she mouthed. "I love you too," he mouthed back. They danced that night under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first dance as husband and wife all those years ago. Jackson held Lily close and thought about the terrified woman he had found in the snow, the strong woman she had become, the life they had built together from that desperate moment of rescue. "What are you thinking?" Lily asked, the same question she had asked him 1,000 times over the years. "About boots," Jackson said, and Lily laughed, the sound still as musical as it had been when she was young. "About how giving you my boots was the best thing I ever did because it meant I got to keep you." "You would have gotten to keep me anyway," Lily said. "The boots were just the beginning, Jackson. You kept me with your kindness, your strength, your love. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. You didn't just save me from the snow. You saved me from being alone forever." "We saved each other," Jackson said, and he knew it was true. "We saved each other." As the years continued to pass, Jackson and Lily grew old together in the house where they had begun their life. Their grandchildren ran through the same halls their children had, and eventually great-grandchildren too. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication his father had, while Sarah Grace taught at the agricultural college, and Daniel ran a school in San Jose that bore his grandfather's name. On a spring morning when Jackson was 78 years old, he woke to find Lily still asleep beside him, her hair now silver white, her face lined with age but still beautiful to him. He watched her sleep and remembered every moment of their life together, from that first desperate day in the snow to this peaceful morning in their old age. She stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife," he replied, the words as sweet as they had been 48 years ago. They rose and dressed slowly, their bodies not as quick as they once were, and made their way to the kitchen where the coffee was already brewing, courtesy of James, who still lived in the foreman's cottage with his family. They sat at the same table where they had shared thousands of meals, drinking their coffee and watching the sun rise over the hills. "It's a beautiful morning," Lily observed. "They're all beautiful mornings when I wake up next to you," Jackson said, and Lily laughed at the corny sentiment even as her eyes grew soft. 50 years of marriage and you're still trying to charm me." "Is it working?" "Always," Lily said, reaching across the table to take his hand. They lived like that for years more, each day a gift, each moment precious. When Jackson was 82, his heart finally began to give him trouble, the same issue that had taken his father. The doctor said it was just age, the natural wearing down of a body that had worked hard and lived fully, but Jackson could see the fear in Lily's eyes. "I'm not going anywhere yet," he told her, pulling her close. "We've got more time, love, I promise." And they did have more time. 3 more years of sunrises and sunsets, of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of quiet evenings on the porch and lazy Sunday mornings in bed. But Jackson knew, the way people who have lived long lives come to know, when his time was drawing short. On a warm summer evening, surrounded by his family in the house he had built with his own hands, Jackson closed his eyes for the last time. Lily was beside him, holding his hand just as she had held it for more than 50 years, and his final thought was of her as he had first seen her, barefoot in the snow, vulnerable and brave and beautiful. Lily lived for 5 more years after Jackson passed, though everyone who knew her said she was never quite the same without him. She remained sharp and capable, helping James run the ranch and spoiling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but there was a loneliness to her now, a sense that she was just waiting for her turn to follow. On a December morning, the first snowy day of winter, they found her in the bedroom she had shared with Jackson, lying peacefully in their bed with a smile on her face. On the nightstand beside her was the pair of boots Jackson had given her that first day, the boots she had kept and treasured all these years as a symbol of the moment her life had truly begun. They buried her next to Jackson on the hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree that had been their favorite place to sit together. The whole town came to the funeral, 3 generations of people whose lives had been touched by Jackson and Lily Yates and their enduring love. At the reception afterward, James stood to speak about his parents. "My father used to tell the story of how they met," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "How he found my mother barefoot in the snow, gave her his boots, and carried her to warmth. He said it was the best decision he ever made, and looking at the life they built together, at all of us gathered here because of that one moment of kindness and fate, I think he was right. Their love story began with an act of rescue, but it became something more. It became a partnership, a friendship, a family. It became the foundation on which all of this was built." He gestured around at the crowded house, at the children playing and the adults reminiscing, at the ranch visible through the windows. "This is their legacy. Not just the land or the business, but the example they set. They showed us how to love through hardship, how to build something lasting, how to treat each other with kindness and respect even when times are hard. My father gave my mother his boots and carried her to warmth, and in return, She gave him a life worth living. That's real love. That's the kind of love we should all aspire to. The family stayed at the ranch that night, filling every bedroom and spilling over into the foreman's cottage. And as they shared stories and memories late into the evening, the spirit of Jackson and Lily seemed to fill the house. Their love story had begun with a desperate moment in a snowstorm and ended with 2 lives well lived and a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations to come. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the hills in white. And if you had been standing on the North Ridge that night, looking down at the ranch house with its warm lights glowing against the darkness, you might have imagined you could see 2 figures standing there together, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest, watching over the home they had built and the family they had created, together forever in the way that true love always is. The story of the cowboy who found the woman barefoot in the snow, who gave her his boots and carried her to warmth, became legend in San Jose. Parents told it to their children as a bedtime story. Young couples referenced it in their wedding vows, and the Yates family kept it alive through every generation. The ranch still stands today, run by Jackson and Lily's descendants, and the boots, carefully preserved, are displayed in a glass case in the living room as a reminder of where it all began. Because sometimes love starts with the simplest act of kindness. Sometimes all it takes is being in the right place at the right moment, being willing to give what you have to help someone in need. Sometimes you find the love of your life running barefoot through the snow, and all you have to do is offer your boots and carry them to warmth. Everything else, all the years of love and laughter and life, flows from that one decision, that one moment of choosing compassion over convenience. Jackson Yates gave Lily Baker his boots on a December day in 1869, and in return, she gave him her heart, her life, and a love that lasted beyond death itself. It was a fair trade, both of them would have said, the best trade either of them ever made. And in the end, isn't that what love is? The willingness to give what you have, to carry someone when they can't walk on their own, to offer warmth when the world is cold. Jackson and Lily understood that from the very beginning, and they lived it every day of their lives together, creating a story that would inspire and endure long after they were gone.